Hello everyone, and we're continuing our course for planning for Eng leaders. We split the topic into three subsections. Each subsection will be covered separately. And today we're going to start with pre-planning. Pre-planning, then we'll be covering post-planning, and then post-planning. Again, pre-planning. This is effectively the stage where you're collecting all the information you need in order to start the actual planning. What this information is? First of all, you need to understand KPI that your business is optimizing for. Because believe it or not, the project that you're doing, if you're the lead on the team, that you've been asked to do is not the reason for your team to exist. There is a very specific goal in the head of your CEO, your boss, your director, VP, that need to be solved, need to be achieved by your project that you're working on, and that is why you're working on this. And there is a huge difference between these understandings, between just having the reason to build the project and business reason why you're building the project. You need to understand the time horizon, and I speak about both long-term, how much leeway you have, how much runway your startup has, how much money you have, or what's the in how many years the goal need to be achieved. Is it half a year, 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, etc. And the short term. The short term is effectively after you have a long term. In which chunks you will be evaluating performance, because it's quite strange if one team will be evaluating quarterly, another one half a year, another one yearly. So you need to agree in the chunks in between of this long-term time horizon in which you're doing your planning. Finally, funding, I actually mean amount of headcount that you actually have. Remember, this is pre-planning, so you need to understand how much you have at hand, how many heads you can hire, not that you will be granted, but can hire. Later in the planning stage, we will discuss how to evaluate how much additional heads you need to achieve the goal, how much you need to ask for. But in the pre-planning, you need to understand how much you actually have. And this is a crucial piece of information that you need to understand what the delta in between what you need and what you actually have at hand. Requirements, quite many new managers or leaders tend to oversee these particular things. There are things that have been enforced on us that could be either legally our servers have to implement something, or maybe there is a particular enforcement that we have to do. It doesn't matter why. Quite common, this enforcement coming in the shape of necessity or even desires of the CEO or CTO do the thing specific way. And you suddenly came to realize that it will be much simpler to actually do it than to fight the fight with them, just to realize that then they still cannot afford this on you. I've been in many situations when like 5% of the capacity of the whole group that I would be leading would be allocated to something that I was not sure that I can push back. And time to time you can have some type of agreement where you giving 5% to some of such enforcement, while in exchange you setting enforcement to other team. So they're just there, and you need to at least acknowledge that they're there. Obviously, the more healthier the group, the more healthier the teams are, the rest requirements that are enforced and not coming from the business KPIs are, but nevertheless, keep in mind that they are there. It's especially crucial if you're a new Eng manager that in the org that don't have this muscle of doing proper planning. So we'll see tons of the things just enforced. The longer you progress, the less such informants will be. You will get tooling how to push back on them, and we will work throughout this course with you on how to do it. Last but not least are requests from other teams, because again, a lot of the leaders usually tend to think only in the terms of their org, what their org need to deliver, but quite common, there is another org that needs something from your org, and that something might be blocking more important business KPIs that even your KPIs that you own. And you need to acknowledge that, you need to understand that in order to figure out the list of priorities and stack rank them correctly. Again, we're not yet saying and analyzing which requests you will be able to accommodate or will not. This is pre-planning, so you need to collect them. So let's dive a little bit in each of them. Let's start with long-term business goal plan. As I said, we need to understand the key performance indicators that your business has. In order to do so, we will be building a spreadsheet that looks like this. In the end, we will cover everything here. And by the way, if you would like this video, you can actually go and purchase it, even though it's free. And if you do purchase it, you will get access to this spreadsheet and many others that we will be covering today. So you don't have to recreate it. And also you will give me a token of appreciation for time that I invested in sharing this information with you. So let's walk backwards from this particular table and see how we're building. And the first most important part is KPIs, key performance indicators that you will be measured. As everyone know, they should be clear and measurable. Everyone on your team should be able to look on them and says, are you on track? Are you not on track? Have you measuring them? Irrespectively, they think this is the right KPIs or not, they still should be clear to measure. The most horrible things would be to put on the KPI something like binary, deliver service A. Again, as I said before, delivering service is not a goal by itself. This is a tool that you're using to deliver particular business result. And the business result is usually to solve particular problem for a very specific set of customers or even one customers. Therefore, you need to pick a KPI that will represent success, the fact that this service actually solved the problem. Otherwise, you can be in the situation when service is fully delivered, but no one's still using it, so there is no any business value whatsoever. If you're building a service, like for example, service introducing virtualization, CPU hours per month that you sold to someone might be a good proxy indicator of the success of your service, but not the actual building a new service itself. Another horrible example, make a product be successful, it's not definable, not measurable, doesn't say shit to me per se. But, and this is a question that they're getting a lot. What if you just start working in your org and your CEO or your director or your boss actually comes and tell you, I want you to build me this amazing service or product or project by the end of this year. This is effectively your requirement, so what do? This is clearly messed up and conflicts with everything that we just have discussed. So do you obey blindly and start building something? So in reality, unless this is a completely messed up situation when you don't have a normal working relationship with your boss or your CTO or your director, this is a time to start asking the right questions. And the questions are, why? Why is the most important question that you can ask? Why do you want me to build it? What are you planning to achieve? And depending on the answer, you can start probing deeper. Who are the customers that will be using it? Which problem we are solving? And why they cannot use something else? What are the success? How the success looks like? And remember, you have to settle down on at least 3 questions before you can start your planning process. Question number 1, what is the problem you're solving? So your boss tells you build the service blah. Try to understand which customer's problem behind this service that you need to solve. Because when you understand the problem, you can start proposing to your boss how you will be measuring success. This is a KPI that I talked to you about. And that is important because if you have a KPI and imagine that during the year you realize that service you're building doesn't solve the problem, therefore you will not be able to achieve KPIs. If you made the mistake of putting service on the table, you will spend countless hours debating with your boss why you need to remove one KPI and another KPI to prove your funding and so on and so on. If you actually settle down on the KPIs, you have a leeway of pivoting whenever you see fit, as long as you will hit the required KPIs that were given to you. So that's why you shouldn't be moving forward until you settle down with your boss and you're on the same page about how the success looks like. And by the way, you as a leader own this to your team, because they need to know that what they're actually doing matters and why and how the success will be measured. This is the most important part of you as a leader that you have to do before moving forward. So don't think it's just about yourself, think about the team that you represent. Last but not least, Why are we trying to do exactly this specific shape? Because there might be reasons, enforced reasons, as we discuss, why we actually have to do it this way. But in many cases, you will realize that there is no any enforced reasons. You need to do your due diligence to understand if this is actually the simplest way to solve the problem, move the KPIs, and to some extent maybe even start from scratch. Or maybe the project already halfway. So halfway, half-baked, this means that finish it might be simpler than starting something that even simpler, but from scratch. When you actually have defined this answer, you can come back and close the loop and finally put an AKI on a KPI in forms like that. Now, what if some of the KPIs requires the input from the different team? This is the second thing that I hear quite often, like, oh, we actually cannot deliver active users on our platform per month ourselves. We just one of the team, but 5 teams need to work together. Therefore, let's not put this KPI, business KPI, let's put a binary things, deliver feature A, deliver feature B, that we think will help another team to actually deliver the KPI. This is a trap. This is a horrible trap. While even the team themselves might ask this question. You actually should not be doing this. You actually should put a KPI that yes, your team cannot deliver on their own. They have to ask other team to do something. But, and this is a very important piece, if you working on the feature that is part of the KPI, ask yourself the following: if my feature is fully delivered, but the KPI is not, the KPI is red, so that's assume my feature is delivered, I change background of the button or whatever, but the amount of active users per month is still low. Will we, the team, be rewarded, or the leadership will still be unhappy? In many cases, answer is that yes, leadership will be unhappy because business is not growing, business is not moving in the direction where we want, so it doesn't matter if you put the OKRs in the shape that are all green. And I've seen this many times where you're opening the OKRs and they're all green, but the business is in a shitty state. That is horrible, and you as a manager owe to your team to be fully transparent and not to lie to them. Because this is one shape of lying where you're saying, okay, because we on our own cannot move this KPI, let's put a binary feature of A. Now, what will happen when you're putting this KPI? The team themselves will start realizing, oh shit, we actually need to work with these 3 teams or with these 3 orgs. So let's actually go to them now and make sure that these guys' dependencies actually have on their KPI list this KPI as well. This is an amazing forcing function for the teams to start collaborating, because they do now understand that this is how their success will be measured, so they have to make sure that they're closing the loop with the rest of the org. Subsequently, when you're doing pre-planning, and when you're actually doing pre-planning the right way, you will start negotiating these KPIs with other teams, and you might learn that suddenly they don't see their company priority the way you are seeing them. And that's fine, because this is pre-planning. This is a time to discover these discrepancies and figure out what to do about them. So, time to time, I've been in that boat when after doing this, I have realized that it's I who have not correctly understood the company-wide priorities. I have worked with CEO, with CTO, adjusted them and completely removed them. Or they were doing so, but in many cases you will find that you both on the same page. They also have to commit it to this KPI. They will put it on the top of the list, and you folks will move on and will collaborate periodically. So now with this is set, you need to understand the time horizon. Let's assume for a second that time horizon in our exercise is 3 years. So now you can more or less put some goals for the KPIs. Don't overthink these numbers. If your leadership doesn't give it to you, just put something that you think reasonable. Again, the more you progress, the more correct they will be. So it's not exactly the numbers that you have to hit, but it should be within the range that's possibly achievable. And obviously you need to have a sense of that range. This is on you to work with the leadership to get a sense, under which goals you all will be fired in these 3 years, and what will be considering the minimum success that you have to achieve. And then after that, some reasonable buffer that you put in. Again, the closer you will get to this third year, the more accurate these numbers will be, so don't overthink them. Just put something that feels reasonable at the beginning, and then work backwards by chunking in the short term. That's what I mentioned. You need to understand long term, but you also need to understand in which chunks your company doing planning. Is it quarterly, that half a year, yearly? Let's assume half a year for the sake of this exercise. Now you can work backwards in time to kind of understand where you need to be. So we see the third line has zeros. This is because, again, we expecting to build a new service to solve particular problems somewhere in the beginning of second year. So obviously usage will be zero. But again, I'm not not setting the binary goal to build a new service. I'm setting the goal of the usage that we're selling. That's a quick difference, and it's zero because we need to build a service, and that's why it's zero. When you have all this, and especially if you're doing it for the first time, this is when you can do assessment of how we're doing now. Let's assume we actually hit the goal on 2 out of 3 KPIs, 1 is in yellow state, and this is where you slightly below, you can start reassessing whether the trajectory makes sense, whether we're still on track, maybe we need to update our leadership on the 3 years plan. You will be surprised. Many companies, they don't have this. Many groups, many teams, they don't know where they're planning to be. They at best might give some assessment, some goals about the next half a year, so they're constantly reactive, they never proactive. But yeah, let's discuss this later. I have so many funny stories about this. Last but not least, confidence level. This is required later on during planning stage to alleviate the risk and emphasize to the leadership that at this point we don't believe that we will hit this goal, and here is what we need to de-risk it per se. So don't try to think about this as assessment of result of your work. Think about this as informing everyone who's looking in what the shape we are right now. It's quite important to paint picture that is slightly worse than it is in real life here, just to make sure that you're on the very conservative side. Later on, this doesn't mean that we have to remain in this confidence level. When we're doing planning, we always can say, here is what we need to move from red confidence level to green or to medium. Or maybe in some cases, it's actually okay to say that this project will remain in low confidence level because it's okay if the project will spill over for 2 years, for example, or like half a year. That's absolutely fine because we have some other initiative. Funding is another thing that you have to figure out. And again, I want to emphasize this again. I'm not speaking about funding that you will need to achieve business goals. I'm speaking about funding that you have right now. This includes headcount of people that you already hired and headcount that you already have to fulfill in the next half a year. That's important. It doesn't have anything yet to do with funding that you will be asking in the planning. Again, we will be using a very simple spreadsheet that allows you to calculate the capacity of the team that are using constantly everywhere, and highly suggest for you to use. Also, if you do purchase this video, you will have access to this spreadsheet. It's simple to replicate, but you always can say thank you for my work, and if you think it's helpful. Let's go one by one. First, just outline how many people you have. ICs, individual contributors, so the first 3 columns is literally how many team members you have that's doing the work, writing code, how many you have to hire. In this case, 8 people already hired, 6 people to be hired, and 2 people are tech lead managers. I usually don't count eng managers, EM, because they usually don't do any work. They don't code, they just talking, sending emails, useless things. So TLMs are actually doing also some job. That's why I have column for them. Then you can outline working period. I highly prefer to measuring in weeks, IC weeks, everything within IC weeks. And this is roughly how many weeks within half a year. And then the ratio. This is important part. Some of the leaders might decide to give this ratio to everyone in the org and says that ratio cannot be higher than this. I actually highly suggest if you managing the org, give them the starting point and say that it cannot be 0.7, it can be at max 0.6 maximum. They can go lower but not higher. What this means is that including time off, holidays, meetings, on call, especially if you're starting second half a year where there is obviously December with many people taking a lot of days off there, you need to accommodate all these things. Meetings on call is something that's specific to a team, but what this says that out of 10 working days, IC works 6, and the 4 days is accommodated for holidays, for meetings, for on calls, for things like that. Obviously TLM works even less, 20%, 2 out of 10 days, and IC to be hired on average also works 2 out of 10 days because we still yet to hire the person. So the person not going to work from tomorrow. We will spend tons of the time. Some of the new ICs you will hire at the beginning of the year, half a year, some of them you will hire closer to the end of the half of the year. Plus they have a ramp up period. So on average, IC that just hired will work 20% of the remaining duration of the time, and with small simple formula you now have a team capacity at 332 weeks. That already includes meetings, on call. This is more or less useful capacity that can be used focused on writing code. We actually almost there. We almost now have all the information that will be required to do the planning. Requirements, as I said, this is something that enforced to you. This button has to be green. We have to make our service. We have to. Legal enforcement, some subjective view of the PM, something that you have figured out that you cannot fight back due to different circumstances. You just have to accommodate for them. And last but not least are requests. I actually really like to create an intake form. I also will share this form with you. It's very simple. Intake form for you where you're saying, tell us briefly about what you want us to do, where they will describe the feature, the thing that they're planning you to do, how much work it might take. Time to time, the team that asking you to do something might not know this. That's fine. This question specifically is not marked as mandatory, so they don't have to tell to you the evaluation. You will have to do it on your own. Then I like to ask this question because it gives me some sense of importance. What will happen if the feature is not delivered? Let's assume we didn't do anything. What will happen? And the last but not least, even though it's last question, it's actually one of the most important. Tell us which your KPIs you will improve on by how much if this feature is delivered. And this is quite crucial because this will allow us during the planning stage to put this and compare it with everything on our team. Because one way or another, you have one team, therefore you have to prioritize all the requests together with features that you have. There is no miracle. You don't have two teams, you have only one team, therefore you will have to merge the list of everything that you're planning to do. And you need to understand which business KPIs you helping this team to achieve. By the way, time to time the team might come and say, sorry, we actually don't have any business KPIs, we don't do planning the way you do, but this is extremely important to us, we have a support from the CTO, so go and do it. And this suddenly becomes a requirement. It's no longer a request, it's actually enforced requirements that you have to do and have to deal with. Fine, but in many cases this simple question will allow you to kind of force them to start doing proper planning and start supplying you this information, because they will start thinking, okay, from business wise, why we're asking them. Maybe it's just a technical debt reduction. Maybe this is infrastructural team, and by asking to do so, we will get back 2 IC months per year, because technical debt will reduce amount of the on-call load, so 2 IC per month. This is the KPI. This is a measurement that we will get if we're asking to do something. So just to repeat, we actually covered all the things that you need to do in pre-planning, long-term business goal, time horizon, funding requirements, requests, and next chunk we will cover how to use all this information during the planning and how to come up with the OKRs, how to start pushing back on some of the things, how to request funding, how to negotiate funding, and other things like that. I really hope it was useful for you. If you do finish listening and at this point, I really hope it was useful. Do please considering buying this video, and I see you next time when we'll be talking about planning. Bye bye.